Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new books by indie authors. Your hostess for today's show is Charlotte Canion. We do hope you enjoyed today's show.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Canion, award-winning author, speaker, and actress. Today our guest is Myra McIlvain. She's a Texas storyteller, and her heritage goes back 100 years. She has written dozens of books and many articles. Welcome to the show, Myra.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'm tickled to be here.
Myra, before we get into talking about your books, I know that our listeners would love to hear a little bit about your background and your family. So can you talk about that first?
Oh, all right. My Hargrave side of the family came to Texas in 1844 and built an old log house that I was born in. It was hand hewn, but it was a huge thing. They tore it down when I was 6, so we don't have it anymore. But when I was just 3 years old, we moved to Houston. And so I grew up in Houston and call that home. I went back there to the farm to visit often, but I never lived there after that.
Now you said it was Northeast Texas. What part?
Yes, it's in Hopkins County, about 90 miles northeast of Dallas, about halfway between Dallas and Texarkana. Definitely out in the country.
It looks like a different country than North Dallas, for sure.
Oh, absolutely, it does.
Yeah. Now, you've got married and had children?
Yes, 2 children, and they're, of course, grown. My son is very prolific. He has 6 grandchildren. I've forgotten him. He has 10 on the way. Number 10 is on the way. I have 6 grandchildren. He has 10 grandchildren, which makes me a great grandmother of 10. The 10th is coming in March. So my daughter has no children. She has children, but they have they've never married. So anyway, we've got a big family.
Sounds like you do. Now, when did you start writing? When did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I really started when I moved from Victoria down on the coast down to Port Lavaca. My first husband was a CPA, and we moved from his work in Victoria down for him to open a branch. It was more of a twig in Port Lavaca of his public accounting firm. And I had wanted to write. I would get an encouragement about writing family stories about the kids and everything. And so a friend sent the Victoria Advocate to call them and said she had a friend who wrote some funny stuff and wouldn't they like to have it? And they said, well, it was the publisher. He said, well, have her send me some. So I was in the midst of moving and I got to Port Lavaca and sat down and wrote 20 articles and mailed them. I didn't have the courage to go in because in those days you could go in. This was 1970, and he bought all of them. So I wrote a family humor column while I was raising my children for the next 6 years. And that's what started me. I had written some poetry and that sort of thing, but this was the first. And while I was doing that, I was writing short stories and doing research on the old historic village down called Indianola. It was a ghost town that had been an enormous seaport that rivaled Galveston until 2 hurricanes hit it and blew it away, just left behind a ghost town. So I was doing all that research at the same time and began to write then about some of that stuff.
Well, you have, yeah. Go
when
ahead.
I came to Austin then in 1977, I got a job writing freelancing for the Historical Commission, and I wrote historical markers for about 6 years. And that really got me interested in the German settlement more than I had been when I lived down on the coast. So anyway, it inspired me to write, first of all, guidebooks that UT Press published. And then finally, I started with historical fiction. So it's just been a long, evolved process.
And I'm sure you've enjoyed the whole journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. When I did the guidebooks, I would get up before daylight on Monday morning after having studied the area for days and go out and see these sites. And I had discovered that I needed to put directions in because if I was going to talk about a historic site, people need to be able to find it. And so that's what I did. And it the first one came out in 1980, and it sold very well. And it was trails around Austin, and it sold well enough that the University of Texas Press was interested, and they picked it up and published another 3 books, all of them guidebooks, but I was telling the history of the area and just the stories, because I love the stories, but I gave people directions so they could actually find the places. That was the way it all started.
Well, was history always something you were fascinated with?
No, I hated it in high school because they made us memorize dates and battles, and I can't memorize stuff. To this day, I can't remember just cold facts. It has to connect. But my professor, as a freshman, at that time, it was Texas Women's University, or it's Texas Women's University now. It was Texas State College for Women in Denton. She made those Puritans alive and turned me on to history. And from then on, that was it. I loved it, but I hated it until that time. Just barely.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Well, do you have any? It's okay.
I can't stop it. I don't know how to stop it. It's not here. It's not my phone. It's in the computer. Okay.
Well, now it's interesting because I'm actually in Denton, Texas, and the
Are you
reason I'm
really?
here is, yes, I have 20 grandchildren, and let's see, 3 of my kids went to University of North Texas, and 3 of my grandkids have gone there. So
Is that right?
we're kind of a spot for them to get a meal. Do you have any stories, or do you use Denton in your, have you ever used people?
When I did my book for the University of Texas Press, it was called The One of That Area, but I was limited to the amount of pages, and I could not do Denton. I just couldn't do it. It was north and east from Dallas. And we made little circle trails that people could follow. And I told them the stories of those towns, and I couldn't do Denton. I hated it because I had already done some work planning to do it. But once I got there and we started getting the pages together, it was just too much, had to cut. That happened I'm very wordy. So I don't have any trouble getting enough words in for the books to meet their minimum. I go to maximum every day, every time. So I don't have any.
Well, what was your first book?
The very first book was called 6 Central Texas Auto Tours. That's not my title. It was published by Aiken Press, an old Central Texas publisher. He's gone now, but it was the first one, and it opened with, it was just trails around Austin, and it opened with Bastrop. And that's how I got the idea that I had to have directions, because when I got to Bastrop the very first day, nobody could tell me where the Confederate Arms Factory was located. And so I thought, well, my word, if they don't know that, if I'm telling people about it, they're going to be frustrated. They can't find it. So I started putting directions in, and that's how it became a guidebook, even though I had no intention of doing. I was just going to tell good stories and about each town. So anyway, it got to be a guidebook that way. And after it came out, then UT Press picked it up, and they did one that was trails outside Houston called Texas Auto Trails the Southeast. And then they did Texas Auto Trails the North and East out of Dallas. And then Texas Auto Trails the South and Rio Grande Valley, all along the Rio Grande. And I love every single one of them and love doing it. It's lots of fun.
Well, this is just fascinating. I'm going to have to stop you right here because we've got to let our sponsors do. So we'll be right back for a brief message from our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Charles Brakefield.
And I'm Rox Berkey.
Together, we write as Brakefield and Berkey.
Our techno-thriller series is 12 books strong, with book 13, The Enigma Tracer, planned for 2022.
Techno-thrillers are the cyber good guys versus today's darknet thugs.
We added our series prelude, Out of Poland, a 1939 historical novella, in 2021.
We also have 8 short stories available in family and women's contemporary genres, with more planned for 2022.
Please visit our website, enigmaseries.com, to learn more about why we say Technology is today's weapon of choice. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elle Ballard, and I'm the founder of Women of the World Network, a supportive entrepreneurial community of multinational women. I'm excited to announce we have second series launching for our anthology, Recipes for Body, Mind, and Soul, on April 7th. If you'd like to participate in any of our future anthologies or just check out our community, visit womenoftheworldnetwork.com.
Welcome to B4R.store, a bookstore for indie readers and indie authors, where indie authors can earn their fair share from the books you purchase. We have a wide variety of genres that you can select from. We also have ebooks and paperbacks. You can select authors by their first names, and we also have music. If you're interested in their city or country, we have that listed as well. If you are an author and would like to be on our bookstore, we have 3 options for you. There is a small minimal charge, or you can join our organization at authorsmarketing.org and learn how to better market and sell yourself. That is B4R.store, a bookstore for indie readers and indie authors. Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new books by indie authors. Your hostess for today's show is Charlotte Canion. We do hope you enjoyed today's show.
Welcome back. This has been my privilege to speak to Myra, and she's got a fascinating story. She was born in a log cabin, has lived in Texas, writes stories about Texas. Myra, you've got one that you're writing right now it's tied to like Waters Plantation and The Doctor's Wife and Spying House. Tell us a little bit about that series.
Yes, Waters Plantation, The Doctor's Wife, and this one that's up here, that's A Long Way Home, were all published by one publisher, and she passed away unexpectedly in May. And so they're being republished. And so the one that's come out first is Waters Plantation. And Waters Plantation is a sequel to both The Doctor's Wife and another one called Steinhouse. And it is about a man. Are you wanting to hear what it's about?
Yeah, just give us a
Okay,
teaser.
it's about a man who this was 1875 at the end of Reconstruction. He prided himself on being a wealthy plantation owner, a merchant, and a man who freed his slaves before the Civil War, and then gave them work after they were free, and then land after the war. And really prided himself on it until his son was ready to leave for Harvard Medical School, and came home the morning before he left from a party and said he wanted to know, was his mother a slave? And that opened the can of worms that our protagonist had spent years covering up, that he had a child by one, not his slaves, but another slave, and had raised the boy as a white child. And so that is the story of him getting in touch with himself and beginning to look at who he was, and also grieving for the woman that he was in love with and lost. And that was why he ended up drunk and bothering the poor slave girl. So anyway, that is the story and how it evolves. And you'd have to read it to find out if his love comes back. But anyway, he had a real struggle with having a son who acknowledged, the young man, he wasn't a child, he was a young man, that he was Black after that. And so that's the story in that book. And if people enjoy history or a good love affair or the excitement of the period between Reconstruction and Jim Crow, which was a turbulent period I discovered in Texas, then they'll enjoy this book.
Now, that was the
That's
Waters Plantation.
Waters Plantation.
Okay.
And the
Well,
one,
then you've got a sequel, that The Doctor's Wife.
oh, well, it's a prequel. The Doctor's Wife of the series is the earliest. It is
Oh,
that's when Al Waters was first introduced, because at that time in that book he was a merchant in New Orleans, and our protagonist in that book was a young immigrant girl who came to Texas with some of the early Germans, thinking that she would be able to tutor a child, and was abandoned then because the child died. And this handsome doctor who was on the shipboard offered to marry her, and she thought it was a great thing, and then discovered that he wasn't the kind of husband that she thought he might be. And so that's the gist of that story. She is searching for herself as she lives in this little village on the sandy beach that became Indianola. And they began to prosper as the town grew, because the Germans, that was the wave of Germans who came in and settled New Braunfels and Fredericksburg. They came in right there at that shore. And some of them were so disgusted with the Verein, the organization of noblemen who had organized the trips to Texas, that they refused to go inland with those who settled New Braunfels. Instead, they sat there and started a little seaport that grew and grew and grew, and really rivaled Galveston. And this protagonist in our story is there while the town is growing, and she's learning to live with her life that's quite different from what she imagined. And then you'll have to figure out how in the world Al Waters is connected with it, because that's where he's introduced.
okay. Then let me know, is the German Family Saga, is that a prequel then to
That
The
comes
Doctor's
after
Wife?
that. In the story starts with the doctor's wife, and then the protagonist and the doctor get quite wealthy, and she sends for Germany for her sister to come and bring her 4 children and her drunken husband. But he ends up drowning before they ever leave the dock in Germany. And so she comes on, and they built Steinhaus, which was a boarding house, so she would have a place to work, so she could run the boarding house. And the story revolves around that boarding house, and starts with the build up to, well, first of all, yellow fever, and the people struggling with that, and the build up to the Civil War. And the Germans, of course, didn't believe in slavery, so it was a terrible time of trying to decide whether to support the country that welcomed them, or whether to go on and join the Confederacy and be part of that. So it was a real struggle. And the story goes on with her raising her children through the time of the Civil War and Reconstruction, and clear to the 2 hurricanes. Then the reason I did The Doctor's Wife, Waters Plantation later, is because everybody wanted to know what happened to that family after the terrible storm that destroyed the entire town. What happened to them? And so that's why we have Waters Plantation. And all these characters are involved in all 3 of those books. It's just kind of a big family saga that keeps on for 3 books.
So that's a trilogy of books
It is.
that you have.
It really is. It really is.
So you're
I
not
didn't
going to
like-
go with the Waters.
I
You're
didn't
not
want-
going to write any more about the Waters family.
Well, I don't think so, except, even Kirkus, when they reviewed it, said that they were sure readers would want a sequel to that. And I thought, oh my word, I don't know that I can do a sequel to that. I don't know that I can continue with that family. But that's what it is. It's those people traveling through the history of Texas during that very turbulent time.
Well, it sounds like you've been all over.
Well, I have.
Now, did you drive to all of these cities and check
yes.
them out?
Oh, absolutely. When I was doing that, those guidebooks, I went to those towns. I was gone from early Monday till late Friday evening, for each section that I did. And then I'd go home and write a while, and then I'd go back and do another section. But that I had to do that. Besides reading the history, I had to go to the towns, because it's amazing what I found out after I got to the town. I couldn't depend just on my research. And I met some very interesting characters and found out some terrific stories about those towns. And that all fed in all the time. I'll tell you a little secret. When I lived on the coast, I was working on the history of a church down there, a Methodist church, and their old bell. And I interviewed an old woman who was 96 years old in 1976. And she's a fabulous storyteller. And one of the stories she told me as I was walking out the door was that a woman, a German widow, came with her 4 children to Indianola. And her husband had been a drunk, leaping back and forth from the ship to the shore and then back to the ship. And the ship began to pull away from the dock, and he leaped again and missed and drowned before his wife and everybody on the shipboard. Well, I could just see him going in the water. And all those years from 1976 until I finally wrote these stories, that woman stayed in my mind. And I did not know her name or what happened to her afterward, but I named her Helga Heinrich, and she's the protagonist of Steinhaus. She is.
Well, this is just fascinating story. We're going to have to take another short commercial. We'll be right back with you.
Okay.
Stay tuned and listen to what Myra's got to say.
Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new books by indie authors. Your hostess for today's show is Charlotte Canion. We do hope you enjoyed today's show.
Each and every one of us has a mission in life. Mine is to help people laugh through the good times and the bad. My name is Charlotte Canion, and I am an author, a speaker, and a host on Indie Beacon Radio. If you need me to speak at an event or autograph my book, you can contact me at charlotte@charlottecanion.com. Thank you, and have a blessed day.
That's really good. And so what other programs are you planning to create?
Many things our organizations work with is, of course, helping authors learn how to better market and sell themselves. So we have the Authors Marketing International Group, the Texas Authors Institute of History, the Drop Everything and Read, Indie. But there's a new organization that's being formed called the Authors School of Business. And this is exactly that. It's a school where authors will learn from the very beginning how to put their books together to get them published, whether it's traditional or self or hybrid, and all the way through the sales and marketing aspect. Make sure they understand every aspect of getting that book done and done right so that they have a greater chance of success. So that's one of many different things that we're working on.
Welcome to the Indie Beacon Show, where readers can discover great new books by indie authors. Your hostess for today's show is Charlotte Canion. We do hope you enjoyed today's show.
It's been my pleasure to speak with Myra McIlvain. She's just a phenomenal lady. She's got so much Texas history. I know my husband would just be fascinated. Just FYI, he's 7th generation Texan. His ancestors fought in the Alamo. So, you know, this is, I should have drug him into the interview with us. But Myra, on this last segment of our show, we would love for you to tell our audience, you know, how they can get a hold of your books, where they can get your books. And I know that you're a fascinating speaker. How would they get a hold of you, your website, everything
Okay.
like that?
My website is MyraMcIlvain.com. And I guess they'll get the spelling somewhere, that they could get Myra McIlvain. That's a terrible name to spell. And then if they want to email me, it's mcilvain.myra@gmail.com. And they can get in touch with me that way. I do speak to groups often. In fact, I lectured for a number of years until this last spring for the University of Texas for their continuing education programs and other programs for lifetime learning type programs. But my husband is older, he's 97. And so I need to be home with him. And so I've not been lecturing, doing things that take all day long. And that's what it takes. It takes an entire morning to do a lecture by the time I take the PowerPoint and do all that. But anyway, that's the way to get in touch with me. And my website is in progress. We're working on it every day to change it and improve it. But right now it's featuring Waters Plantation that just came out. Doctor's Wife will be republished now in January. And then A Long Way Home will be republished in February, because they have to be republished since my old publisher died. She wasn't old, but former publisher died. And just sort of, we got to be an orphan with those books.
Well, Myra, you are a wealth of knowledge. And if you had to, summation in 3 or 4 sentences, some advice that you would give someone who, wants to write a book and hasn't, written the first, what advice would you give them?
Absolutely stay with it. Don't let anyone discourage you and say, well, you're not making money. Don't worry about it. Write what you want to write and keep working on it. Rewrite it and rewrite it until it suits you and it sounds like you want it. It's your story. And that's what I suggest. Never tell anybody how to do it. Everybody does it their own way.
Well, you've done it fabulously. I have to ask you, have you been to Hondo, Texas?
Oh, yes.
Because I know that's a big German town. Well, all of my husband's ancestors live in Hondo, and we are actually, in fact, I could give you some names of people to talk to, but we're going down in 2 weeks to a big cousin reunion. So, when you started talking about the German ancestry, it was, it was right at home.
Well, they're impressive people. I'll tell you, I'm not German, but I have been very impressed with their heritage and how they worked and educated their children. It's impressive.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you think about the Germans that formed a lot of Texas.
Mm-hmm, yes, and built the first schools. They were amazing. Yes.
Yeah, they were amazing. Well, Myra, it has been a pleasure. I have enjoyed tremendously listening to you share just bits and pieces of your stories. They sound fascinating, and your books are just phenomenal. This is Charlotte Canion, your host, and I want you to remember one thing. A rose is like a book. You can't know its beauty until you look at it. And a book is like a rose. You won't know its full beauty until it's open. This is Charlotte saying bye for now. See you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Indie Beacon Show, produced by B. Allen Bourgeois for the Authors Marketing International, LLC. Copyright 2022. Voiceover by B. Allen Bourgeois. If you would like to be a sponsor of the show, please contact us at authorsmarketing@outlook.com. If you would like to be on this show, it is free to authors. Simply fill out the form at indiebeacon.com. The music is provided by Happy Follows. The music is entitled